Hello, this is your third in a series of clips dealing with Congress. In this video presentation, we're going to talk about the idea of representation. In my lectures in class, we talked about different specific ways in which legislators act in a representative nature. But what we want to look at in this particular clip is the way in which we think about representation, different ways in which we might be able to define representation. So that is our focus today. Get to this first question of what is representation? What do we mean by it? It might seem like a simple concept, but we do have some sort of different ways in which you can define it. Hannah Picken, a political scientist from Harvard, has offered a relatively acceptable, straightforward definition of representation means, and that is acting in the interest of one's constituents in a manner responsive to them, which is a good, nice, general idea of representation. That is, we expect people that we elect to represent us to work in our various interests along the way. But there's also a couple of different ways in which we might approach representation, or which a representative might approach their job. Like, what do we mean that they represent us? The most direct way, or the way that might come to your mind first, is what we would call a delegate model of representation, the delegate model of representation. And this is where basically a representative pays close attention to what their constituents feel and think and follows what they believe, right? Follows their guidance in this particular case. This is essentially the idea that representatives would keep a strong connection, whether it's through polling or listening to what people say when they call in or email or send letters, and act based on how they feel the people in the district feel about an issue. So if they feel that the majority of the members in the district have a strong opinion about the U.S. involvement in the Syrian civil war, then a delegate approach to representation would be that the representative would act in that direction and not necessarily just base it off their logic or their own feelings about the issue. It's not a famous quote, but a quote I remember hearing many years ago after an election was when a constituent, this was I think in Iowa maybe, said, "We didn't send you to Washington to make intelligent decisions. We sent you to represent us." In other words, don't go be making decisions and thinking about it. Just simply listen to what we think back here and vote accordingly. So this is a very straightforward way. This is very much what we might see as our first impression of what representation might be. But there's also another way in which to look at representation, and that is the trustee model. And in the trustee model, it's the idea that an elected official would use their judgment and their opinion and their what would be essentially superior knowledge and access to information to make decisions on your behalf. That is, when you elect a representative under this model, you elect them to go to the legislature or to be president or whatever it might be, and to exercise their judgment on your behalf, if that makes sense. You can't be there to make all the decisions. They're going to make the decisions for you, and they should make those based on the varieties of information that they might receive along the way. So you may have an opinion about the U.S. intervention in the Syrian war, but it's likely that your member of Congress has access to much more advanced information and can see the variety of issues that come together on it and can look at it in terms of perhaps the broader public, or we might say the common good of the nation, and make a decision on this. Under this model, we would say, once a member is elected, they become servants of not only you as a constituent, but the people of the United States as a whole. That is, a member of Congress, when voting, would have to consider the larger implication of their vote to the country as a whole. But in many ways, it's not just that. It's a more narrow definition. That is, I selected you because I believe that your values and your judgment are what I like, and I trust you to do that. And I will evaluate whether that trust was properly placed at election time. So that's a trustee model, and sometimes that makes some people buy into that model more likely as well. One person who sort of saw this model as being the way to think about it was a guy named Edmund Burke, um, who was writing in the late 1700s, who says who believed in the trustee model. Your representative owes you not his industry only, but his judgment. And he would say he betrays instead of serving you if he sacrifices it to your opinion. So Burke, who many of the founders respected and took into consideration, and many thinkers and writers today embrace Burke as well. In fact, he's become sort of popular in more recent years. Would very much think that this idea of representation makes sense, and this idea of sort of public opinion polling your constituency doesn't make sense. The question is, which one of those prevails, not just which one you would like, but how do members of Congress actually act when they make their decision? And the fact is, there's a clip there. I'm going to try to get this clip up here and if I do get this clip up, this is a clip of President Obama talking about members of Congress in voting for the Affordable Care Act, for Obamacare. And what he describes in a lot of ways is trustee representation, not delegate representation. So if I get the clip up, that's what you should pay attention to in that. So the question is, how do members of Congress actually act, right? None of them act one way or the other per se, but Pitkin, who gave us the original definition we worked with, offers as a more what we call descriptive view of representation. And that is what she would call political representation. And it's much more accurate in terms of how you do it. And she would argue that on some issues you would act as a trustee model, and some issues you act as a delegate model. She would say on issues in which constituents, that is the people who elect you, have very well-defined views and they feel strongly about it, members tend to act in accordance with those things. So if you come from a district in which there's a very strong, overwhelming feeling that we should have broader limits on guns, that is belief in gun control, it's likely that your member of Congress would vote in that direction. It's because you're paying attention to it in very direct ways and you're sending very clear signals to them in terms of how you want them to vote. But on issues in which either the constituents are unclear, they don't have good information, or they don't have any information at all, they don't have an interest to have the information, or in which it's divided and murky and it's not clear, members in many ways see that they should be acting and using their judgment in the best they know how, and the vast majority of decisions are like that. That is, there's lots of decisions they have to make which none of us have, or very few of us have a strong opinion about. So when the Congress was debating Yucca Mountain is a mountain in Nevada that they were planning to use to bury nuclear waste, constituents in Pennsylvania probably most of them had very little to say about Yucca Mountain. But the member of Congress from here had to make a decision about Yucca Mountain, and they would probably use their trustee model as opposed to the delegate model within this. And this is what Pitkin would say is more accurate in terms of what members actually do in terms of their daily activity. This is a nice little chart which gives you also an idea of the kinds of things they do depending on who they're focused on. When members of Congress are representing their districts, they're not just representing individuals, as we see here, and engage in these activities that are related to individuals, and this is what we think about mostly, but they also represent organized interests. These are like interest groups that might represent your interests. So if you're from a district that has a lot of people who believe in gun rights and believe in the NRA, and indeed might be members of the NRA or certainly sympathetic to the NRA, you might find yourself being a representative of and supporting that organization, the NRA, because your constituents are engaged in that organization. And then there's things that are a district as a whole that are ways in which you can represent the good of the common good of the district in general. We also can get an idea of what Congress looks like, but I'm going to save that for the next lecture. We're going to have another lecture on Congress so that you can break this up, and we're going to take a look at that in the next set of slides here. So you can go on to the next recording for this one.